Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Joining me in studio today is Mike Pieciak, our Vermont State Treasurer, who just announced, back on the 25th,
yes,
that you are running for re-election.
Yes.
A, welcome, and B, congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you, Pat. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, no problem. I'm sorry I wasn't there with you. I really wanted to go. They would have all those list of folks that signed up. That was a great event, I bet.
Yeah, we had a great list of co-hosts. I felt really, happy about that. And it was really quite a broad list. A lot of Democrats, some progressives, some Republicans even showed up. So
Good
it was
for them.
nice to have a broad show of support.
That's great. Well, that list was very impressive, and so I want to go too, but I couldn't. I think it was actually here.
It was here in Montpelier.
Yeah.
And the Capitol Plaza is where we had the event, and the Capitol Plaza looks great as well.
I heard it's all redone, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all redone. Coming back from last July's flooding, looks better than ever. Fully remodeled. So we really had a great time and look forward to having other events there.
Yeah, that's really a treasure here in town, the Capitol Plaza. That's great. And what was interesting, when the former owners, went blank.
Fred,
thank you, Fred. How could we forget Fred? But anyway, I think he bought it after
the
a flood as well.
Flood, I think,
so I'm eager to see what it looks like under its new ownership and new design. Anyway, when you were announcing your re-election run, what was your message? What was it you hoped to do and encourage them to vote for you?
Yeah. So, we really focus on the ways that the Treasurer's Office can build economic opportunity for Vermonters. And the three things that we hit on were our work in affordable housing and housing investment, our work in retirement security, so a program called Vermont Saves specifically, and then our work on this initiative called Baby Bonds, which would give people that are born into poverty, babies born into poverty, a set amount of capital for them to be able to buy a home, start a business, go to school, or roll it over into retirement. So all of those, we made progress on all three of those issues, and there's more work to be done on all three of them, plus other issues.
Well, and one of the things that you and I talked about before you came on the show was climate resilience.
Yes.
Which is different than other climate change. Could you talk about the word resilience as it has to do with climate?
Yeah, for sure. So I think broadly, as I think about it, there's climate sort of mitigation, like you're trying to mitigate the impact on the climate from using your car less or having an electric vehicle or weatherizing your home, putting less carbon into the atmosphere. So we talk a lot about that side of the equation, how Vermont can put less carbon into the atmosphere. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that no matter what we do alone as a state, even if we put no more carbon in the atmosphere starting as of today, that we are still going to see the impacts of climate change, and we are already seeing the impacts of climate change, and we'll see them worsen over the next decade or two. Now, we need to do what we can to do our part to reduce our carbon. The rest of the world does as well.
Right.
But we need to be prepared and resilient for a changing climate here in Vermont. And the way our climate is going to change is it's going to get warmer, it's going to get wetter, and there's going to be more severe storms as well. So we saw that last July.
Yep.
The other times that Montpelier had flooded, there were a hurricane way back in the 20s or 30s, a tropical storm, the ice lodging under the bridge. So these really significant storms or these sort of really specific, unusual experiences. And this last July, it was just rain after rain after rain, and then a really significant rainstorm. So that's really following the kind of weather that's been projected for our state. So we need to think about how do we build communities that can resist that kind of rain. Where does the water go? How do we dissipate it upstream? How do we build infrastructure, wastewater and water infrastructure in our communities to get the water out of our downtowns? How do you make buildings more resilient?
Right.
We talked about this example of the Downstreet home, a property here in Montpelier that couldn't have been built more closer.
You're talking about that.
To the river.
Yep.
But they built it in a way that could withstand flooding. They raised the building. Most of the first floor is parking. They had almost no damage. And then the DMV building, they waterproofed that basement, and they were able to prevent a lot of flooding. And our building was even further away from the river. at the pavilion, but we had significant water damage because we had not weatherized and waterproofed that building. So whether it's at the community level or whether it's at that specific building level, there's a lot of opportunity for resiliency to prevent these worst impacts of climate change.
Yeah. I like that explanation, so I'll start using resiliency because we are a small state, and we could do everything we can do for climate change, and I don't think we'd move the needle much. So I think the protecting ourselves and being resilient is probably a good response.
Yeah. And then, and then I think, as I think of it, on the other side of the equation, sort of that carbon side of the equation, we want to be thinking also about how do we get less volatile energy sources, so less, sources of energy that won't be sort of, going up and down and causing great price spiking. And then generally overall, how do we make it more affordable? And some of those are aligned with, green energy type of energy production.
Right.
So that's sort of, I think, a reason for Vermont to really focus on both sides of the equation. How do we make pricing less volatile, more affordable on the energy consumption? And then how do we build communities that are more resilient to climate change? And we got to do our part too, in reducing our carbon footprint, but so does the rest of the country and so does the rest of the world.
For sure. And there's just so much we can afford here. Do you know, we just did a survey, another group I work with, and it was interesting. Everybody said they support climate change, but they don't want to pay for it. Yeah. So there may be a little resistance to how much is this going to cost. Yeah. But it's something that people need to buy into. I don't know how much that is. But
on the resiliency piece, I think the reason, again, it's such a important point, and I'm sure if the survey takers sort of had this point explained to them, they would agree with it. But you're going to pay for it one way or the other.
Well, that's a good point.
And if we can get ahead of it with some of these resiliency projects, then those are really good investments. And that's what our office and the Agency of Natural Resources has been working on, a climate resiliency plan that we hope to have finalized by July of 2025.
Oh, that's great. Excellent. Yeah. Good for you. I just need to make one comment before we move on, because you mentioned carbon footprint, and I wanted to talk about the effort to fossil fuel and the impact on the pension. But VT Digger covered your announcement, and they used the word you faced scrutiny in your prior role as Commissioner of Financial Regulations about the EB5 project. And I want to publicly state, Michael, that you were one of the leaders in coming forward and going, hello, there's a problem here. And I think they should have recognized that. So I think VT Digger needs to, well, no, that's true. And I checked with a couple of other people. I said, I'm not wrong here, am I? And they go, no, not at all. You went, hello, there's a problem.
Yeah, and I think most importantly, we figured out what the problem was. We did that in a really short period of time relative to the SEC, to the U.S. Attorney's Office, to other investigators. In Vermont, we were able to figure it out in about 13 months. And for those other organizations that were much better resourced, it took them years. So we really worked hard, figured that out quickly, brought it to light.
Quite the thing. My turning point was when Tony Palmisano said, looking at the big dig in Newport, the big hole, wanting to know if he would invest, and he goes, nope, the finances are squirrely. Yeah. So he was out, and I thought, well, there's a clue. If the biggest realtor in Burlington says there's something wrong.
And he was 100% right.
Exactly.
He had great instincts.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's Tony. Oh, that was Tony. Anyway, so I'd like to take a look back at your last 2 years. Running again.
Yes.
It's so much effort, isn't it?
Every 2 years.
I know, exactly. We keep hitting up the same people, and I wish they'd get serious about that. But I looked at your website, and you have got so much stuff. I would encourage all of you to look at the Treasurer's website. It's fabulous. It's very interesting, well written.
Well, thank you.
No, seriously, I enjoyed reading it, if that's such a thing. But anyway, do you know who I had on my radio show today? Tom Galanka.
Oh, yeah.
Who talked about what we're going to talk about next, about S-42, which was the fossil fuel divestment bill, which didn't make it out. It took a long time to get out of the Senate. This was the second year, right?
It came out of the Senate last year. Yeah.
Right. And they're still talking about it. And I know you testified a lot. So did Tom. And for listeners, Tom is the chair of VPIC, which is the Vermont Pension Investment Committee. And we're lucky to have him for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, you were working with them to try to find some kind of compromise, but of course, they didn't have any testimony over at the House at all, I don't think.
Yeah, pretty limited. But yeah, we've been working the last couple of years trying to find a path forward. I think there are legitimate points for those that want to look at this issue from all sides. But our perspective was, if you're going to remove fossil fuel from the pension system, first of all, do no harm to the pension system. We want to make sure that our teachers and municipal workers and our state employees, that they have a strong pension that's there for them when they're going to retire.
Right.
So how do you do no harm? I think you take a reasonable approach. You try to have sort of what I would describe as a risk mitigation framework. So you're trying to reduce your risk, reduce your exposure over time. And in some ways, that's what VPIC has been doing. The fossil fuel holdings have been going down over time, and I think they will continue to go down over time because, no doubt, the next 20 years for the fossil fuel industry will not be as profitable as the last 20 years. That's the direction that government is moving worldwide. That's the direction consumers are moving. It's just the direction that we're confronted with the climate change.
Right.
So it's something that you have to keep a close eye on, and you have to mitigate to the greatest extent that you can, while not doing significant or immediate harm, or any harm really, to your pension system. And I think we're finding a path forward there. We couldn't get all the way to the end, but we gave it a good try.
Well, I think, and I'm sure it'll be back. This is not a dead issue by any means, but I was concerned because we were just coming off of a $45 billion liability issue. And I thought, let the legislature that was passed 2 years ago take effect. Let's start which it is.
Yes.
Let's start building it back up where we get to a place where we're comfortable that if we do make a mistake, if we lose revenue by doing this, which I'm sure people will hopefully not do that, but maybe some other year when we're a little bit more comfortable with where our pension liability is.
Yeah, I think
that was my thought.
Yeah, and that's a fair perspective. I mean, what we were trying to do in H42 was not have immediate harm or any harm to the pension system.
Right.
So it was a slower progression. It was accounting for things like a de minimis. You could have a certain amount of fossil fuel holdings even if this bill passed, because there's a recognition that Vermont can't dictate to certain significant large investment firms what they do or do not have in their portfolio, and we need to invest in them to get the kind of returns that we need. So there was a recognition of all of these different perspectives, and I think it was the best, certainly the best crafted divestment bill that's been in the legislature. And I think I would have supported it going through. It didn't go through, but
I think it'll be back. It'll be back. But I think there's a little education that needs, because one of those senators was telling Tom, well, just pull out. How hard can this be? And I'm like, maybe we don't understand how it works. You just don't pull out.
Yeah.
You have to understand, as you said, what the ramifications are.
Yeah, we don't have a direct, you might have a portfolio in your own personal account. You might have your own retirement account, and you might have you might directly own, GE or Procter & Gamble. You might own an index fund that owns GE or Procter & Gamble in that index fund or in that mutual fund. You can sell Procter & Gamble and GE, but you can't go to your mutual fund and say, I want you to sell Procter & Gamble and GE out of the mutual fund. So if you leave a mutual fund or an index fund because of certain fossil fuel holdings, you're losing all of the other investment. And the same is true in private equity or private credit. You can't dictate to them, we don't want that one investment, even if it's a very small part of the portfolio. And that's why we wanted to have this de minimis exemption, because it does account for that. But it would be really challenging to completely pull out, not because you're losing all of these great returns, but just structurally, the way that these investments are put together, we don't have control over what's in them or what's not in them.
Right. I didn't understand that about the index funds. I better. I was trying to con Tom into coming up with some kind of a program for our schools about stock markets.
Oh yeah, right.
I told you about
Yeah,
my
that would be
idea
great.
for a game.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool? I've got to get somebody interested in that. Start out as a freshman, give them X bucks, Monopoly money.
Yeah.
And see what happens when they graduate, and give them a whopping prize if they actually...
A graduation prize, that'd be great.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
I think that. I think we should make notes of that, anybody who's listening. Anyway, but plus we all need to understand about the stock market, because you just explained something to me about index funds, which I didn't know. And I think one of the arguments was always, we won't be at the table. So if you pull out, they won't listen to you about addressing fossil fuel issues and doing what you can as a corporation to minimize it. So anyway.
Yeah, and again, the de minimis exemption amount would allow for that. Would allow for that engagement. To happen, because you can have a de minimis, you can have a small amount of holdings, both because of what we just described with the challenges of completely eliminating your holdings, but also you would be able to hold some equity so that you could have
be
engagement.
at the table. Good for you. I didn't know that. Well, if it comes back, we'll have to chat again. Anyway, so I wanted to look at your accomplishments over the past 2 years, which are many. My gosh, do we have time? Yes, we do. You mentioned the baby bonds, but I'd love to have you talk about that, and that's H769. I don't think it didn't make it out, did it? Or
so the language that ended up, that we hope will finalize this, through the process during the likely veto session. It's in a bill H55, so it got pulled out of that bill and put into this bill H55. And what it would have us do is look at 5 or 6 or 7 things about the program, the operations of the program, where the revenue would come from, how we would invest it, how it would be operationalized. So there's some study language, but we didn't want just a study. We wanted something that was more active as well. So we asked for language around having a pilot project established, and that is in that bill as well, and we're hopeful that it will get through. And there are a couple of national foundations that are really into this idea of baby bonds. They're really into building what they would describe as the new economy, or rethinking the economy. And baby bonds is really a way of rethinking the opportunity and the resources that are given to those that are most in need and most vulnerable. So I mentioned, it would give, under the program that was proposed, $3,200 for every child born into poverty in Vermont.
That's great.
And what we're trying to do with that is sort of threefold. It's focusing on generational poverty, it's focusing on rural economic development, and then it's focusing on keeping young people in Vermont. So the generational poverty piece, it's so hard for families and for individuals to sort of dig out of this, generation after generation of, of experiencing poverty and those around you not having the resources to help you out as well. I don't think we realize how much we benefit from our parents or uncles or aunts or, extended family that have done this little thing for us here or that little thing for us there. And a lot of individuals don't have that privilege or that benefit. So this would be providing resources and capital at a critical point in a young person's life so that they could make good long-term financial wealth building decisions for themselves. It's the rural economic development, because more children are born into poverty in our more rural areas than our urban areas. And then it's keeping young people in Vermont, because you have to be born in Vermont, and then you have to be living in Vermont at the time that you claim your baby bond. And
and that's got a double sword. That's great that they have to stay here.
Yeah, and you had to stay here.
Great.
And most of what you could use the money for is for investing in Vermont. So by the time you turn 18 years old, that $3,200 would have grown to about $12,000. If you're if you're on the later end, you wait till 30 years old, it's closer to $24,000. So that's the value, that's the benefit of investing and that compound returns.
What a great example for people about the value of investing.
Yeah, exactly.
And looking the long term, right?
So if you think about that, even at the 18-year-old mark, if the state of Vermont is putting in $3,200, but you're getting $12,000, the vast majority of what you're getting has been earned through the stock market, through investing. It's not what we actually put in up front. And it's the same with our pension system as well. Most of what pensioners end up getting are those returns that we're earning in the stock market not the money that the state or those as individuals are contributing.
Excellent. Good job. So age 55 is where this
Yes.
language is. Is that a bill that was passed and went to the governor, and you think it's going to be vetoed, or can they take up anything they want during the veto session?
Yeah, they can take up anything they want, but this bill, on like the very last hour of the session,
Right.
it got voted out of the Senate, and then the House worked on it and changed just a couple of things and then voted it out. So I think the Senate just has to concur, and then it will go to the governor's desk. So I hope that will happen during the veto session.
Well,
Yeah.
I do too. That's great. Because that just sounds so, I don't know what else is in the bill sometimes.
There's a lot of other stuff. We're focusing on our portion.
Yeah, right, exactly, and rightly so. So anyway, you also started talking about Vermont Saves. Could you talk about that a little bit, that program?
Yeah, so Vermont Saves, that was a big initiative we had last legislative session. We were really fortunate to get broad support for that concept. We had unanimous support in the House. Nobody voted against it. We had unanimous support in the Senate.
Great.
So we had
That's
all the way across the board. Yeah, and then the governor signed it as well. So what it's focusing on are individuals that don't have a retirement account through their workplace. And in Vermont, there's maybe 80,000 to 90,000 people that are working for an employer that doesn't
I bet
provide.
many nonprofits who
A lot
can't
of
afford it.
nonprofits, a lot of small businesses.
Yep.
Nothing against the employer. It's just it costs a lot to operate a 401k plan or a pension plan, which most
This is perfect.
don't. So this would allow, it requires the business or the small nonprofit to sign up for Vermont Saves. There's no cost to the business. There's no expense for them to do it. It's a really simple process to sign up. And then their employees will automatically be enrolled unless they opt out. So you can always opt out. You can always decide, I want to save less, I want to save more, I want to invest more aggressively, I want to invest more cautiously. But there are defaults. So if you don't do anything as an employee, you'll be defaulted into the system. You'll be defaulted a 5% payroll deduction that will go into your Roth IRA. You'll be defaulted into an investment fund that most closely aligns with your likely retirement date. And the great thing about the program, from my perspective, is it's really easy. Obviously, it's sort of that inertia of starting to save. People will start and get on that track. But if you ever need your money, if there's an emergency, it's set up as a Roth IRA, so you can pull the money out without penalty or without tax, at least the principal that you've put in. So it sort of secondarily serves as an emergency savings account for so many people that don't have any emergency savings. So we think it's something that will really be an impact. We called it a program that will make a big impact without having a big price tag.
That's great. I was on a nonprofit board for quite a few years, and we were hoping for something like this because collectively you can make it worthwhile for people to be part of such a group, but the nonprofit just couldn't afford it. I mean,
exactly.
And the people there, the executive director, she didn't have any savings like that because they don't make much either.
No, exactly.
So what a perfect thing for them. I hope the word's out.
Yeah, well, we're in the process of setting it up.
Great.
So it passed last year. We entered agreement, or in the process of the final negotiations, but we publicly stated that we're entering into an agreement with the state of Colorado that we can administer the program more efficiently.
Great.
It'll cost Vermonters less by partnering with another state.
Thank you, Colorado. That's cool.
And it will allow us to set it up more quickly as well. So we anticipate it being stood up by early 2025, so either by the end of this year or just over into the new year. We could actually set it up more quickly, but we want to give enough time for us to get the word out about it to employers and employees.
That's great. You know, when you were talking before about Vermont housing, climate resilience, economic opportunity, and I was reading about that before the show, and I'm thinking, how do you do that? But then we talked about your 10% local investment, and that's how you do it.
Yeah, that's a big program.
So maybe you could talk, that is very exciting, what you've done.
Yeah, so this program we really are excited about. We've done a lot of work with it, and there's still more work to be done. One of the things we want to continue to accomplish in a second term. But Vermont had the statute probably from 2015 or 2016 that allowed the treasurer to invest up to 10% of the state's cash balance, basically the money sitting in our checking account, into economic development. Now, pre-pandemic, we might have $200 million sitting around in our checking account. This is money that has been appropriated, so it has a place to be spent, but it hasn't yet been spent. Or it's money that's come in that hasn't yet been appropriated by the legislature.
Right.
But there's always a certain amount of money that's sort of churning there in these accounts. Since the pandemic, both because we had a lot of federal money come in, but also because we had a lot of new revenues come in. We had a lot of people move to Vermont. Our economy is doing really well. That number went from a couple $100 million to over $2 billion. So we have a much bigger amount of churn in our cash fund.
Great.
So we said, well, 10% of $2 billion is a much higher number, so we want to expand this program. So we expanded it now up to $115 million. And then we wanted to focus on how can we make the biggest economic development impact, and we decided it was housing. We talk to employers all the time that say we can't hire anybody because they don't have housing. We'd like to expand. We'd like to get to a second location, but we can't because we can't find workers, and it's because those workers can't find housing. So that's what we prioritized. We ended up partnering with the Vermont Economic Development Authority, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and have put out about $65 or $68 million of low interest loans to support housing throughout Vermont.
And just so people know, there's a committee. You do not make the decisions yourself. It's the LIAC.
Yeah, it's called the Local Investment Advisory Committee.
And there's a committee that makes these determinations where the money goes. So money well spent for sure.
Yeah, our perspective on it is, we're supporting about 1,100 units of housing throughout the state. There are a lot of projects that were slowed down because of COVID. They were slowed down because of supply chain issues.
Yeah, right.
All of a sudden, in this high interest rate environment, a project that cost, $17 million is now costing $22 million.
Right.
And how do you finance that $5 million extra in an interest rate environment as high as today? So that's why we wanted to come in at a low interest amount so that those projects could continue to go forward, and they'll pay dividends for us for generations now that they're being built.
Yeah. Well, they keep saying that's the answer to workforce development and everything is people don't have a place to live and that they can afford.
That they can afford,
right. And that's the key.
Yeah, affording. Availability is a real issue too.
Right.
We in Vermont have really high median rents, so that goes to affordability. But we also have really low vacancy rates, which just goes to availability at all.
Yeah. And you know what, Catherine Dimitrick, I don't know if you know her, she's from the Northeast Kingdom in one of the planning groups.
Oh, yeah?
And she was on the show, and she said that there's such a shift for single occupancy.
Right.
That it's not families anymore or two people. It's single occupancy that's what's eating up their stock up in the Northeast Kingdom, which I thought that was very interesting, that things have sort of shifted a little bit.
When you look at the data, 10 years ago, the average Vermont household size was closer to 3 people, and now it's closer to 2 people.
Right.
So we have been, even if our population hadn't increased, even if we stayed the same, because a lot of people say, well, how do we have a housing crisis if our population isn't increasing? And we have seen a population increase since the pandemic. But putting that to the side, the other reason why we're having a housing crisis is because of the thing you exactly said. People are getting married later in life or not at all. They're getting divorced. They're not living intergenerationally. People are living longer as a widow or a widower. So all of those things have contributed to the same population needing more housing. And that's a real challenge. Plus, put on top of that, folks that have moved here since the pandemic, and we've seen a clear uptick in population increase since the pandemic. That's put a real strain on our housing market.
Yep. Well, welcome to Vermont, y'all. That's great. Well, we welcome folks. That's great. You mentioned you knew the guy who runs Rural Edge.
Yes.
Who is that?
Patrick, yeah.
Patrick. He was on one of the shows I do. And what they're doing up there is amazing. What they're taking existing buildings and completely transforming them. Yeah. And we have some like schools around here that could be transformed into housing, although that's quite a challenge because the plumbing and stuff, it doesn't...
Yeah, plumbing issues and like building materials and the way that they were built.
Yeah, asbestos probably.
Asbestos, yeah. But yeah, there's a significant project up there in Newport that we've invested in. I think it was close to $5 million that we invested in a low-cost capital loan, and it'll, their overall plan up there is hundreds of units of housing.
Yep, right.
And that will be really important for that community. And it gives you a sense of the need if the Northeast Kingdom, even our most rural communities, are in that desperate need for housing. It gives you a sense of how bad the housing problem is throughout the state.
Right. Well, it's everywhere, isn't it? That's great. I also noticed on your list that manufactured homes, which I think they're fabulous. Digress. I lived in Florham Park, New Jersey, of all places. That's where I was brought up. We had the very first mobile home ever be delivered on our street. I didn't know our street could handle a bazillion people. Everybody came out to see this manufactured home and how it was assembled. And
that's interesting.
And I mean, it was so cool because you figure it's built inside in the right environment and the right atmosphere and no rain, no nothing. And then it shows up and it was ready to be moved in like a day.
Yeah.
It was the whole town came out.
So, so right now through our investments, there are 3 communities, manufactured home communities that we're supporting.
Great.
And the type of work that we're doing with them is sort of threefold. One is working on their infrastructure, because a lot of these parks, the owners have taken them over. Previously, they were sort of third-party owned. You didn't actually own the property that the home was on. You paid a lot, and that was a challenge for people because you didn't actually own your home in the way that you think that you own your home and have control over it. So a lot of parks they've been buying and creating HOAs, but now they're left with a lot of infrastructure that they need to invest in wastewater and water.
Right.
So we're helping finance those investments.
Excellent.
We're helping finance these new electric mobile homes that are highly efficient and then have solar panels and sort of are able to run at a really low fossil fuel or even no fossil fuel.
That's cool. Where do you see those?
There's going to be some in Brattleboro.
Oh, really?
And I believe the other place that we will see them is in Milton as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I can go see, because I'm going up to the Newport to go see River Edge, what they're doing. I think it's amazing. It's incredible.
And then the other thing that we're working on, and this is more appropriate to Brattleboro, although I think, again, the Milton investment, same thing. They have to relocate some of the homes out of floodplains.
Right.
That's been a big issue at Tri-Park in Brattleboro. So that's a significant investment as well, creating new locations for these new homes to be placed and moving them out of the floodplain up onto the hill and out of harm's way.
That's great.
It goes to the resiliency piece that we talked about.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. That's really how it should be. Because there's not much land left in Vermont, at least down in this area, anything. You don't see any big tracts of land so much. So it's good they can do that.
And a lot of the, if you look at Johnson, you look here in the central Vermont area, previously during Irene and Brattleboro, a lot of the places where manufactured home parks are in places that are really vulnerable, susceptible to flooding.
Yep.
And they've been really hit badly.
Yeah, we had one in Berlin off of 302 how many times can you be flooded out?
Yeah.
And there's families in there with little kids. And then we had the, forget the name of the mobile home park on Route 12 during Irene, gone.
Yeah.
They've redone it all by raising all of the homes substantially.
Yeah.
But it's tragic. I mean, within 10 seconds, your home is gone and you've lost so much. You must have done a lot of work with flood recovery with all these investments.
Yeah, we did. I mean, one of the things we did right out of the gate was we followed the playbook that Beth Pierce had put together after Irene, which focused on getting money to communities. So there are certain payments that we make every year to communities. We basically fast-forwarded those payments so that they got them now instead of later, so that they had cash on hand to do the important work of rescue and remediation and recovery. And then we also, separate from that, said we need to set up a credit facility for these municipalities that were hit the hardest. And we worked with the Vermont Bond Bank to set up about $15 million of low-interest loans that are going to help these communities take out high-interest loans that they had to secure right after the flooding as they're waiting for FEMA reimbursement. So it'll save the communities, we're estimating $3 or $3.5 million. And that'll be a big deal for some of these smaller communities like the village of Johnson that was really hit and was really devastated.
Really? I didn't realize that, because I had talked to Paul Costello today, who was the head of the Vermont Rural Development Group, and I was on the group that went up to Johnson to listen to where they do the talking to the citizens and that sort of stuff, and being part of the report, the final report. That was a great community.
It's a great community, yeah.
Well, of course, Barry right here, just
Yeah.
never saw so much mud in my life.
Yeah, we were helping a friend of ours that weekend after the flood, and it was the basement was just.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah.
That's what I lasted an hour because of my age. I said, "All right, you've got
That
to
was
find
good.
me.
That's
You've
good.
got to find me something else to do."
Yeah.
It was like lifting cement.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
it was.
really
And it was
awful.
the smell and
Yeah.
the chemicals, and it really there's a part of resiliency that is important as it relates to human connection. Like people like my friend who was able to get 30 people to come
Wow.
help her clean out her basement. It took us all day.
Yeah,
It was hard
right,
work.
right.
But there are other people that don't have that kind of community
right.
resiliency and connection with
Right.
people. So something we have to think about at the state level. How do we build that kind of community resiliency in terms of volunteers and keeping a lookout for each other and helping each other?
Well, I think Montpelier. I'm with Katie Trouts, who is Montpelier Alive, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, thousands. I mean, they just came out of the woodwork, and
Yeah.
that's one thing I've noticed about Vermont. When sometimes I get mad politically, and I'm like, I'm moving, that's it. But then something happens, and everybody's a friend. I mean,
Yeah.
they just come out.
Well, look
and
at the
if you
pandemic.
ask for help, yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
I think with this, people always talk to me when I go out, and they'll say, thank you so much for the work that the state did during the pandemic.
Yep, right.
And I'll always say it was Vermonters that were the all-stars because they paid attention, they followed the information, and I think most importantly, in a place like New York, when New York is talking about making sacrifices for your neighbors,
Right.
you don't know your neighbor in New York, in New
Right?
York
No,
City.
you don't. You don't, but you
But
know
in
them
Vermont,
here.
you know them, and so you could understand how your sacrifice was making an impact to people in your community.
One of the staff here asked me, "Oh, ask Mike," because they would cover all of the press with you giving out the statistics about COVID cases and that sort of stuff. But that was a lot of work, but everybody wanted to listen.
Yeah.
That TV, the stuff you did, and the doctor,
Yeah, Dr. Levine.
Levine. I mean, he just had all these older people falling in love with the man.
Yeah.
My mother just said, "Well, if Dr. Levine said it, had to be true, and if Mike Pieciak said it, it had to be true."
The funniest thing about that, after the pandemic had subsided a bit, we went down to Rutland, and there's a Hathaway farm just outside of
Yep,
the city.
I know it.
And they do a corn maze.
Yep.
So
right.
their maze that year was the heroes of the pandemic or something, and it was focused on first responders and everybody that
Right.
was. But it also had cardboard cutouts of the governor, myself, and Dr. Levine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, my
and it was
gosh.
quite funny, and people could take photos next to it and whatnot. And then I asked the folks, like, what are you going to do with all of these afterward? And they said, well, there are quite a number of people that have claimed the Dr. Levine one that were
My
maybe
mother
in an
just-
older demographic.
Dr. Levine is just, there's something about him is just very appealing to older folks.
Yeah.
So anyway,
The
he's a good-
Vermont's doctor.
Yes,
it's felt like
exactly.
that.
There you
Yeah.
go. So on my list here, we had the unclaimed property pilot program, which you've done a lot of advertising on because there are quite a few people that have some money
Yeah.
in your shop.
$120 million
Whoa.
of unclaimed property. Yeah. So we have over 1 million pieces of individual property. So that could be somebody having 10 cents with us. It could be people having thousands of
I think
dollars.
I told you I have 25. So
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
No, yeah, we're working on that to get that back to
Don't do that.
you. So, the story I like to tell, which just happened a few months ago, and why I think it's so important for people to check, and why we are being more proactive at trying to get it back to individuals. So we're having these pilot projects where
Yep.
we're automatically sending the money back to people. And then when we go to events, we bring the unclaimed property list. We encourage people to look through it.
Good for
We try
you.
to proactively look through it. We went to town meeting last year, and this year we're able to return thousands and thousands
Great.
of dollars. But it was at Putney town meeting that we had this great story where I went the night before, was staying at my parents' house. I asked my dad, there's a couple of really high figures here. One person, we had $38,000
Ouch.
of unclaimed property for them. And I said, "You know this person?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I think I've been doing their taxes for like the last
wow.
40 years. Let me check in the morning if it's the same person.
Yeah.
I'll give you the address, and I'll give you the phone
get
number."
out.
And so it was the same person. And I called, and the person's daughter answered and said, who I was, and that I was calling because we had unclaimed property, and it's $38,000.
Wow.
And I think they didn't. I'm not sure they believed me right away, but we had to sort of work through that.
Yeah.
And then we were able to get the check back to the family, and we heard from the gentleman. He was 97 years old, and he said that it made for a great Easter. The fact that everybody was able to come together, and it made it a little bit more generous that Easter. But then we got a note from his daughter a few weeks later who said that they weren't aware of the money, they didn't know it was there, and the fact that they were able to get it now meant that their dad could stay in his home for another year.
Oh wow,
and
that
that really
you cry.
is a big impact.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
How great is that?
Yeah.
Because at that age, you really don't want to leave what you're used to, and go into a home.
So it's important
That's
just for people to check. Missingmoney.com is the website that will let you check all of the unclaimed property sites, not just in Vermont.
And do you have to keep that forever?
You always have the ability to claim your unclaimed property. We'll always make good on it. Yeah. There is for the last number of decades, there's a certain amount that goes to the general fund every year. That's sort of an amount that is in excess of what we.
But on this, we're self-funded, so if somebody says you owe me $36,000, you have to.
We have it.
You have to find it. There you go. Well.
We have it. We have enough to make good on all of our claims.
On my $25, I'm so excited. Sarducci's, here I come. Anyway, another thing that I meant to ask you about this: the rating agencies. That was always something that really. They were down on us a little while because of the pension, because of one of the reasons they said because of the age of our population, right? That we're all old. And how are we doing? I think things are looking up, are they not? I hope.
Yeah, they're getting better. They're getting better on both of those marks. And the thing about the rating agencies, why that's valuable, why that's important, is we need to borrow money oftentimes as a state to make important investments, to build buildings, to do resiliency projects. And the higher we're rated, the less money that costs us, the more money it means in taxpayers' pockets. So the worst rating, the more it costs us, the more we have to pay for that in interest, and the more expensive it is for taxpayers.
Because we were A+, and then they did, I shouldn't say all, AAA, down to minus, A-.
So it's AA+ now. So it's the next one down.
That's good.
Yeah. So
we're getting there.
And why they care about demographics is they want to make sure you have an economy that can pay back the loan, the debt, the bonds. And they did recognize that our population has been growing. It's been growing by younger people. It's been growing by people that have higher incomes. So more money to pay back these bonds. And then on the pension front, we had a pension agreement 3 years ago. We've seen 3 years of rising assets. So it's called the investment, the liability ratio. Like how much money do you have now versus how much do you have to pay over time? And that ratio was unfortunately going down for like a decade. And now it's started to tick back up. So it's working. We are seeing a reduction in our liabilities. We're seeing an increase in our assets. And that means the program is much more sustainable. And the rating agencies like that.
Because there were a few of us who thought we didn't go far enough. But I think over time, if it looks like it needs to be tweaked, maybe it wouldn't be such a dramatic tweak, and they can just kind of inch it along a little bit,
we're
gradually.
keeping a close eye on it. It's working right now for the teachers and the state employees. There's also the municipal pension. That one we kept a really close eye on and took action this year to increase the contribution amounts from both the employee and the employer. Because that system was not going in the right direction. Their funding ratio was going down. So we implemented a quick, small fix to help it start going in the other direction. So we'll keep we got to keep a close eye on that.
Yeah, for sure, because you don't want to. I remember Tom Pelham, we were out to lunch, and he told me it was the 45 billion, and I thought he kept saying million. I'm thinking, well, and then he kept saying, no, Pat, read my lips, B, billion. And I think everybody at the Capitol Plaza heard me because I sort of reacted. I was a little surprised it had been allowed to kind of get to that point.
Yeah.
But there were some changes in the way the accounting was done, right?
Particularly for the what
government
they call
accountability.
the OPEB, the other post-employment benefits, and those sort of liabilities didn't have to show up on your balance sheet.
Right, and there it was.
Decision.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, I know you and I think the former commissioner, the former treasurer, Beth Pierce. Financial literacy was a big issue for her, and I think is a big issue for you, which is a very good thing. So, what are you doing about financial literacy and how it ties into economic development?
So we have a couple of initiatives. The first initiative that we announced back in February was a partnership. It was a connection between our office, M&T Bank, and then the Network Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. So we were able to coordinate those parties. M&T Bank committed $100,000 to the network. The network is able to establish what they're calling economic impact grants. So if an individual is in a vulnerable relationship and in a situation where they're threatened, they might stay in that relationship because of finances. They don't have the independence to get out. So this would allow the network to provide these sort of economic emergency grants so that individual can get to safety. And then there's also a savings benefit match program that they've established with this money from M&T, so that once you're independent and you start saving, that'll get a match from the network. So it encourages savings and it encourages, further independence financially. So that's one partnership that we've announced and we're really excited about. We looked at a program that was similar to that in Massachusetts, and we sort of made it work for Vermont. We added this economic, emergency grant program, and we think we improved upon it. But it was an idea that we saw from Massachusetts. The other thing, we're continuing to do education and outreach. We are bringing in a podcast next month for Pride Month, and it's called the Queer Money Podcast. So they focus on LGBTQ plus financial issues, because for the LGBTQ plus community, there are very specific financial literacy issues for that community, whether it's around healthcare or adoption or surrogacy or retirement when you're in a civil union versus a marriage versus a domestic partnership. So that will be a great event. And then we're looking forward to doing something in the future, not all that different from what you're talking about, as focusing on high school students. We'd love to have a Treasurer's Cup competition. Beth Pierce used to run this. It fell off during the pandemic, but it's an opportunity for high school students to learn and compete against each other and get those important financial literacy skills along the way.
It is so important to understand the growth of money and savings, like you were just talking about. If you have, $3,200 when they're born, and how it can escalate and be a very nice sum of money when you graduate or get a little older. That's great.
I mean, that $3,200, at a 7% annual return, which is not, it's a pretty reasonable return. If that individual, if you had a baby that you gave $3,200 to and they left it and invested it, at age 65, it would be $280,000.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
One can only have patience to leave it there. It's always sitting there, Michael, and you're like, well,
there's always problems today, and that's the reality, and that's why in our Vermont Saves program we built that reality in by allowing people to have an emergency savings account and pull the money out.
Well, I know you used to be able to borrow from your pension investment. When I was coming up through my career, you could borrow, and then you sort of pay yourself back, which was a good deal.
Yeah, out of the 401k.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a list here of State PACE Reserve Fund, State Energy Revolving Fund, Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund.
Yeah.
What are all those, and who watches over them?
So generally our office, the Higher Education Fund, that's an interesting program. It's an amount of money back in the year 2000 that the legislature set aside. It's about $32 million. And under the statute, it says basically every year that we have investment gains, we can pay that out to the Vermont college system, to UVM, and to VSAC. So last year, fortunately, we had about $1 million in gains from that investment, and we're able to give about $350,000 to each of those institutions. So it really sits there as an opportunity to have income and support higher education. The PACE program, some of those other programs are really focused on energy efficiency within the state of Vermont. So again, we're able to lend out money to BGS to do
excellent
work within properties that the state of Vermont owns to make them more highly energy efficient. And the problem there is that, or what you're trying to solve for is that sometimes it takes a while to economically see the benefit of these investments, but eventually they happen. So they need low cost and long-term capital in place. And it's really the state lending to itself when we're making those kind of investments.
Sure. And we certainly own a lot of buildings, the state of Vermont.
Right. So it's a good example. We're setting a good example by, it's one of those things we talked about earlier. You're reducing your carbon footprint by having buildings that are tighter from a weatherization standpoint. But you're also hitting the affordability piece because you don't need to spend as much to heat your home once you've been able to weatherize it. So it's really, a twofold benefit.
Good job. I don't know. There's so much good stuff happening. This is kind of fun. I really do wish that you would check out the website because doing good work.
Well, we have a good team.
Yeah,
and that's really important.
Yeah. So anything you want to say in the last few minutes? Why should we vote for Mike Pieciak? And check out the blue and white sign. You'll see them around the state, I'm sure, soon.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be up in, last time we ran, we went to every single town in Vermont, all 252 towns.
And, you said 52. I thought there was 51.
51, and then when we started this tour, it was 51, and then the city of Essex Junction was created, so it split off.
Now it's 52?
Now it's 52.
What's going to happen to the 250 club?
They're going to stay 251. Yeah.
So I think we're pretty close to 250.
Yeah.
My husband and I do that.
That's nice.
Cool. Yeah, it's great.
But even growing up in Vermont, I hadn't been to a lot of communities, and seeing the communities, talking to people in those communities about what their challenges are, what they're worried about, was really helpful in bringing that back to Montpelier. So that's what we plan to do again in our campaign, not to visit every town, but to get out to all of the communities to get a sense of what's on people's mind and why people should vote. For me, for a second term, it's really to continue this work we've been doing. We have more investments to make in housing. We have more work to do on retirement security. We have more work to do on what we would call building and rebuilding the middle class through programs like baby bonds and other economic opportunities.
You ever get involved with tiny? I love tiny homes. And there's two in Barrie, and I go by them on purpose because I just like to see them. I think they are so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was by myself, God forbid, but if I was by myself, I would go into a tiny home. I think they're a riot.
Yeah, and it's one of the tools in solving the housing crisis.
Yeah, for sure.
Everyone always asks, like, how are you going to solve it? And it's really through every little piece of policy. Like some people like tiny homes, some people want pre-manufactured homes, which I think is an important piece. There's a new way of building homes with new material called mass timber. That's an important part of it's lighter but stronger than steel.
Really?
It allows you to build higher with less cost. There's focus on senior housing because senior housing will help open up other housing as people move out of their large homes. So there's a lot of different ways to tackle this, and I think tiny homes is one of them.
I just get a big kick out of them. There was one where you order from Amazon, and it comes in this little box, and then it starts unfolding into this decent house.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And if people are interested in what they call the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, that would be like you could set up a little tiny house in your backyard and have somebody move into it.
There you go.
Yeah.
I love it. I just think I think you'd have to have a certain mindset, but I actually like smaller. I don't know what I do with all my stuff, but that's what the outdoor shed is for, right?
Right.
Anyway, Michael, I wish you a lot of luck. And
thank you.
Good luck going around, because I think you even mentioned every community in this state is different.
Yes, it is.
And it's important for candidates and for elected officials to realize how different they really are.
Yeah, they're all differently beautiful. I mean, that's the one thing that sort of ties Vermont together is the landscape. It's different in different parts of the state, but it's all equally beautiful. But the people, they're very different in different parts of our state. They have different histories. There are different industries and economies that have been there over time. They have different challenges. We just need to be able to recognize that in Montpelier.
Well said. Thank you very much. Good luck, Mike Pieciak. This is Pam McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbite. See you soon.